This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, medical, or mental health advice. We speak from our personal experiences and opinions. The views expressed are solely those of the individual speaker and are not intended to malign any group, club, organization, or business.
Hey, folks. Tony and I have been taking a little bit of time off for rest, and we're back in the saddle now. I'm getting ready. We're doing a number of interviews and recording coming up, so stay tuned for some really juicy new content. Been having some really amazing conversations with people who are interested in what we're interested in, which is having the personal development space, coaching space, be a safer, more ethical environment for all of us lifelong learners out there. That's why bother confronting the line. So here we are. In the meantime, I have been really blessed with the opportunity to meet a lot of amazing people. And one of them is John Atak. John Atak is a former Scientologist turned whistleblower, using his personal experiences and rigorous and in-depth research to expose the inner workings of not only Scientology, in fact, he kind of left that a long time ago, but other authoritarian systems. I just recently read his book, Opening Our Minds. I think it's essential reading for anybody living in these times to really understand how much easier it is for us to be influenced and manipulated than we really understand. Mostly what gets in our way is we think we can't be. We think we're smart enough or aware enough or whatever that we can't be taken advantage of. Or if we are taken advantage of, okay, we're consciously participating in that. But I think we're all starting to find out maybe that's not always true, that we are getting involved in making choices, taking actions that we don't fully understand until it's too late. Too late meaning we've overly invested our time, our money, our heart, our resources. I just really appreciate John's work in exposing sort of the underlying ways in which we get pulled into these kinds of authoritarian relationships, high control relationships. He is a prolific author, expert witness, educator, and he provides a uniquely informed perspective on coercive influence and psychological manipulation. So I'm excited to share with you. I think we're going to do it in two parts because it was a long interview. John and I have had a number of conversations, but we're going to share some of these conversations here on Confronting the Line. I highly encourage, if you follow Confronting the Line, that you also put in your favorites and subscribe to John Atak Family and Friends. It's just a great learning podcast. John is so deeply read and researched and studied. He talks about a lot of the nuances. Hope you enjoy this very first conversation John and I had. I sure did. Till next time.
Recording in progress. What a lovely voice that is. Hello, everybody. I am John Atak, and we are today welcoming Anne L. Peterson, who wrote this lovely book here, which we will talk about. So tell us, why don't we start with the definition of a cult? Because we said we'd do that. So if you'd like to read out, this is Jolly West's definition of a cult.
Perfect too, because I've had some people call me after reading my book that, you know, they were angry because they were defensive of Landmark. And this one guy told me, he said, yeah, I read the whole book because I just was like, he wanted to prove me wrong. He said, and then I closed it and I just laughed out loud because I realized your book is not a condemnation, it's a question. He goes, I saw the question mark, but I didn't see the question mark till after I read it. So,
yeah.
Right. So is this a cult? So the definition of a totalitarian cult, a group or movement exhibiting a great or excessive devotion or dedication to some person, idea, or thing, and employing unethical, manipulative, or coercive techniques of persuasion and control designed to advance the goals of the group's leaders, to the possible or actual detriment of members, their families, or the community.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite ones, actually, that I've seen. It's really good.
Over the years, it's the best one I've seen. It's the one I keep referring back to. Because it's easy to think that the term is in and of itself pejorative or negative, and it isn't. When it becomes totalitarian or authoritarian, it is. But a cult is really a devotion to a leader or to a teaching, fundamentally. And as Jolly pointed out, that can get very nasty, and unfortunate things can happen.
One of the things, since I'm in a very different place than I was a year ago, it was literally a year ago this month, my book was published. I've learned a lot. But one of the things that has fascinated me is how Werner, so my book is about my time with Werner, and then reverse engineer, like coming back from there to see and learn more about the organization that I spent most of my adult life, Landmark Worldwide, as a part of. And but I find it fascinating how it kind of went from definitely the early days, S and all that. It's all around Werner. Werner is God, everything, all the systems and structures are around recreating Werner in the world, all this kind of stuff. And there's definitely that is alive in Landmark. But the abuse around him was the thing that kind of woke me up was, these people I knew and loved and colleagues when they came to me asking for help because they were being abused. So I was like, what I now know is that his proclivities and what he does around him with his personal staff is the culture inside of the main aspect of Landmark, the centers division. So now, probably by no accident, because that was run by his sister, his brother and sister, right? But it was fascinating to me how effectively they transferred the cult kind of adoration from a person to an organization and what they call the work, right? So in Landmark, everything is about the work. So meaning, which is code for Werner's ideas in the world. And that my generation, we didn't know anything about Werner. I mean, he was gone. He had benevolently, because he was pursued to the ends, even a death warrant was how I was told the first time, was put on him by Scientology. For my generation that came in like after 1991, 1992, Scientology was the big bad devil that destroyed his life and his reputation with a little help from the IRS. But that was all instituted by Scientology. This is the lore. And he was gone. And then later in 2000s, you'd hear he'd pop in once in a while, just, to consult, to help out, always a benevolent, grandfatherly, fatherly kind of narrative. And so, which is why when I had the opportunity to then work closely with him, I didn't see any danger at all. Why would he? It was quite shocking, actually, that first program when we had I tell the story in the book a little bit, but the general manager comes to me and says, we have a problem, and if you don't sort it out, your group needs to leave.
And the problem was
that his staff had threatened essentially the main gal, the hotel contact that was our liaison, between the program we were offering and the functional production side. So they had threatened her in a way that left her in tears. And he said, "You're not leaving any of my employees in tears, and I'm not going to tolerate this." It was very startling for me. Startling.
And I mean, my good friend and colleague Steve Hassan talks about the influence continuum, the idea that the closer you are to the central and usually described as charismatic leader, then the more the influence is. And there's a dilution as you move away. In studying Scientology, I interviewed many people who'd worked with Ron Hubbard, and the stories were baffling to somebody who'd believed in this as a teaching that was going to help humanity, to find that there was this monster at the middle of it, this ferocious, selfish, immature human being who was tyrannical in behavior towards others, who was abusive, physically abusive towards people, psychologically abusive on a daily basis. And you're sort of going, the person who initiates the technique must be the model we're seeking to create. So what's happened here? And so many people that I talk with would try and deflect me, even though they'd left. They'd try and deflect me from the experiences they had of L. Ron Hubbard and their direct experience of him. I mean, in 1991...
What do you mean deflect you? Can you how did they deflect you?
They try and tell some positive story about him, or not give me the full details. The first time I talked to somebody who'd been thrown overboard from 25 feet on the deck of his ship, the Apollo, into the human sewage in the harbour of Corfu, the Greek island of Corfu, in 1968. The first person who told me that, a guy called Nev Chamberlain, his parents obviously had a very strange idea. We're going to call you Neville. He just brushed it off. He said, it was a bad experience. The next time I talked to him, a week or so later, because I'd gone and found some photographs that Hubbard had taken of this and published. I chucked people.
Well, because it's not wrong. I mean, Werner puts his abuse under the title ruthless compassion.
Exactly.
His promise to you, if you work for him, is that you will be more than a fart in the wind. You will be a force. And it goes all the way back to the very beginning. And Yeah, I'm curious about what you're saying because it's very difficult for me. One of my reactions, so when the book came out, I literally was flooded with calls, texts, I mean, channels I didn't even know I had, people
Mm.
contacting me saying, thank you. I was prepared for everything but that. I was stunned. I'm still stunned. I
Yeah.
still hear from 2 or 3 new people a week that find the book, read it, and they're like, thank you. You gave
Mm.
words to what I sensed but couldn't get through the value of the work. But the work is so valuable. But it changed my life, which the more people I talk to, the less I believe that, for the record. But I know that we were convinced that that was the case. I don't
Mm.
think that's the case. But that narrative is what, yeah, so he threw me overboard. So, one of Werner's signature moves is strangulation. So he strangled
Mm.
me, or he punched me, or he called me vile names, or he threatened me, or whatever. But anything after that but makes me a little bit insane right now. Like, no, there is no but. Like, you can have all those things without the abuse. So why would we tolerate the abuse? Why, as we as a society, now I'm like way into the bigger world. Like, why are we so tolerant of exploitation and abuse in our society? Like, what's with that? And I think it has a lot to do with this thing you're talking about, the but. We're like indoctrinated in this idea that pain is the only way to get gain.
Yeah, and which is it's as ludicrous as the idea that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, because which was Friedrich Nietzsche actually originated
Mm.
that and spent the last 15 years of his life in an insane asylum because the syphilis he'd caught hadn't made him stronger. It leads to the idea that it's a good idea to hit your children with a baseball bat, because if it doesn't kill them, it'll make them stronger. And we accept these peculiar little heuristics and platitudes. And in Scientology is absolutely, there are literally hundreds of them.
Really?
Group called Ex-Scientology Kids, when we were talking, I made a comment about how many little slogans are in Scientology, like "make it go right," and they sent me a list of more than 400 of these things that
Wow.
they just put together. So, yeah, I had an encounter with, and I'd love to use the German pronunciation because he does say that he is
Absolutely.
Werner Hans Erhard, but we're going to have to call him Werner because that's which is much closer. No, we won't get into that. To Wiener,
Yeah, there you
and
go.
maybe that's a reflection of some kind. But in 1999, I was approached by Werner's one of Werner's assistants, who
Wow.
said Werner is being harassed by Scientology. You're an expert on Scientology. Will you help him deal with harassment? I didn't get a second call because he fled the country because I think one of his daughters had accused him of abuse.
That would have been 1989,
It's
99.
not 91. I was definitely, so that
89 to
allegation must already have been
91
there.
is his whole
Yeah,
like
91
takedown.
was 91 February is when I was approached because
Makes
I
total
remember
sense.
I remember telling Steve Hassan at the time, I was in LA, and saying, "Oh, I've been approached by the founder of Est," and he was like, "Oh, you can't talk to him. You can't do anything with that." And I was like, "Well, no, I'm just really curious because I know that this is derivative of Scientology. I know he's
Absolutely.
somebody who's taken a great big helping of Scientology, and so I'd be really curious to meet the guy and see what's going on." I didn't have any more contact. But there was certainly no, Scientology won't have issued death threats against him. That is a nonsense. They will have harassed him to within an inch of his life, given the chance.
Yeah.
But
And wasn't he, I can't remember. I know a squirrel, and then there's some term that I'm slipping on right now.
squirrel is directly it. He would be fair. He would be fair.
Fair gamed. That was what it
Yeah.
was. Fair
So
gamed.
any Scientologist could do anything they wanted to him, including destroy him, without being punished by Scientology. While there will have been operations, certainly, to infiltrate Est, I met somebody who'd done it on behalf of Scientology because Hubbard was jealous. He couldn't understand how it was that his techniques had been taken away and used to recruit so many people and make so much money
Right.
because it was so much more successful. I read your book last week and went, yeah, this is great. This is one of those books everybody should read to understand, because, and an interesting part of it is that once you've left, the clock starts ticking and things start speeding up.
That's
So when
right.
you leave, you're going, these techniques are brilliant. This is world saving. This is fantastic. What can I do to continue this? This is how I left Scientology, because I felt Hubbard wasn't there anymore, and bad people had taken over. And within a few months, I was kind of going, actually, I'm living in this kind of tinsel world. This is not, in fact, true. What's happening in Scientology is very simple. People become euphoric.
Yeah.
They get high. They feel fantastic. We both know John Hunter and his idea.
Brilliant work.
It is, absolutely. You get this excess of dopamine where we just feel wonderful and we want more. When you then start talking about, well, how did your life transform? Somebody says, well, my marriage fell apart. I was bankrupted by paying money into the group.
It was all a choice. So it was a choice. This is what we'd say in life. It's a choice. So, which gives me this illusion of power, right? This illusion that I somehow brought it all on myself. So the manifestors would say I manifested it. In Landmark, Werner tried to get rid of all the weird woo-woo shit. So it's choice. Everything's choice and 100% responsibility. So I chose that, and which does have power to it. I mean, I kicked my husband to the curb, right? Like literally within 2 weeks of doing the forum. Now,
like it was exactly the right thing.
It was the right thing to do. Exactly. So, but then my participation masked, which is what I'm now seeing as the most destructive aspect of these kinds of programs, is not what it does, it's what doesn't get done while you're doing that. And you're trapped in that cycle. So it's literally like if all I ever ate were peas, I'm getting some nutrition I need, but I'm missing a whole bunch else. And eventually I'm going to atrophy and die because I'm not getting what I need. And that's what's happening now is I have a group of, I call them landmark recoverers, landmark deconstructionists. And that's the biggest thing we're dealing with. It's not for some who were directly abused and experienced humiliation and abuse, which is there, people. Sorry, not sorry, but it's absolutely there. It's all over the organization. And even one of those is too many to my way of thinking. That's another thing that drives me crazy. Well, but so many people got value. I'm like, okay, so this many should have been, harmed? What?
Yeah, we only murdered 3,000 people.
Who gets to
20,000 people benefited?
There you go. It's a great balance. It's part of anyway, it drives me crazy, all the platitudes about that. But there's so much that's not getting addressed. There's trauma that I'm not dealing with because I've decided, I'm at choice. I remember when the Me Too movement came, it was quite cathartic for me. It was 20 years after a situation which happened very much at Landmark, and Landmark, quite honestly, handled it really well, particularly for 1996 or 97, whatever it was. But, where somebody who was a coach in a program that I was facilitating stalked me, and, it's beyond flirting, somewhere between flirting and rape. That, and I finally said, fine, we'll have sex. I was all in my Cosmo, I'm at choice, I'm 100% responsible for my life thing. And I thought, if I have sex with him, he'll go away. That doesn't work, by the way, ladies.
Don't try this at home.
Exactly. That's what I thought. And then later, turns out he was doing that with a lot of women. Well, one of them was much smarter than me and actually called the police. And there was a big investigation. To Landmark's credit, they handled it quite well. Now they had a lot to protect. HR came up and interviewed us all. They got involved in the police case. And I remember when the cop came to me and he said, were you assaulted? Were you raped? And I said, well, I can't really say that because I did say yes. I did say I didn't want to, I didn't like this person. Nothing about it felt right. But I was kind of all in the high of fun, the women's movement. We can do anything men can do. And if they can run around screwing anything, why can't I? Yeah. And so that investigation, which also doesn't turn out well, by the way. I was a brand new introduction leader, which is the first level of leadership. And I'm like, I'm 100% responsible. And so literally this police officer, he kept looking at me and goes, did he assault you? Did you give consent? Did he rape you? And I could not say yes. Because the police officer, because I had said yes to the guy, it wasn't till the Me Too movement and the whole thing came surging up for me. And I went, that's assault. And it was very much like that for me when I started hearing from these staff members around Werner. I'm like, wait, he's assaulting you? Wait, I knew he was kind of an asshole and he was harsh but we had been indoctrinated. I know you read the part about the Full Metal Jacket, which honestly is a movie that should be buried to the center of the earth, never to be seen again, in my opinion.
Well, it depends what you take from it. you know.
Did you see the comments? I put the clip in the footnotes, the exact clip that he showed us. What startled me when I looked it up was the comments under that clip, which are very much like, yeah, we need more of this. Yeah, we need, and anyway, I was appalled for obvious reasons. But it still had that same thing of like, wait, what? And it's years before you can even see that.
Yeah, and you still with me?
Yeah, my dog is talking to a dog on the street.
Fair enough. It's a metaphor for the authoritarian cult experience, that you come away and go, was I raped? Did I give consent? Did I choose this to happen to me? And when you've been brought about to think, and it's one of the things that Werner takes from Scientology, which Hubbard took from Christian Science, the idea, which we now have the law of attraction and the secret, everything that happens into you is through your determination. You make it happen. Now, this cannot work in any scientific setting. It just cannot. It's like the law of karma cannot work, because if there are 8 billion human beings, all with their desires, somebody they're not going to get what they want. And the idea that you can get 500 people getting on a plane at the same moment, who've all their karma is leading them to be dead at that moment. When you think about the intricacies of how you get that to happen, it becomes like Laplace's demon, which is the idea that if you know the position of every atom in the universe for one moment, you can predict everything that will happen. But what you need to determine that is something bigger than the universe, the complexity of the machine necessary. So we aren't actually making this happen. We are doing the best we can and being as causative as we can within this, taking as much responsibility as we can. With Landmark, one of the fascinating things, I've been in this work for 40 years now, and nobody talks about Landmark. You are one of the first people to actually dare. I've met people.
Part of why I did it, because I was like, somebody's got to talk here. And I felt that I had done enough work and had enough support, both legal support, but also psychological and friends. I mean, I just huge shout out to my posse, Sarah Edmondson, Nippy Ames, couple that want to remain nameless, but in Mark Vincent, like they kind of forged a path, but then they've also, and the folks at Seek Safely have just been incredible. So I felt somebody had to open this can of worms, because the other thing about Landmark that I think is a little bit distinct from Scientology is, Werner's aim was to turn this into a societal phenomenon, like to so infiltrate society. This is what transformation of life itself actually means in that lexicon, which is to turn these ideas of integrity, responsibility, accountability, as defined in that set.
None of them things that applied to his own life.
No, don't get silly. That whole, but to have that become, that's what transformation of life looks like, which I now am, well, we just have to look around us to see what bullshit that is. But that's not, how is that different? I've now come to see it. How's that different than colonization? How is that different than, I'm half English, half Irish. So my people, going to Africa and or even the United States and gonna, bring it into the modern world and turn it into something better. It's the same, to me, it's the same mentality. And it's so arrogant. But if we can even look past that, it just isn't true. It's not true. It's not effective. It doesn't happen.
But I think it is something that is in common between Scientology and Landmark. The idea in Scientology is you're going to clear the planet. Everybody in the world will be given this. Then you have, as with so many other groups, the Moonies just have the most astonishing number of front groups, hundreds of groups that they've established. The Collegiate Association for Research into Principle, for example. And Scientology too has Citizens Commission on Human Rights, Narconon, Criminon, and there have been so many others along the way that have been put forward, and they are set to infiltrate government, to influence the way that governments work, which included the Snow White program. 11 Scientologists went to prison in the United States, including Mary Sue Hubbard, Ron Hubbard's wife, for infiltration of government agencies. And one of the ideas that was running was to get enough blackmail material on politicians so that you could influence things at a governmental level. So taking the world over one way or another, the megalomaniac instinct is there with all authoritarian leaders, how they cloak that and how they express it. So, yeah, reading, I picked up this wonderful book, paid for by.
Oh, yeah.
I've
That
got
one.
and this is just for me because I'm a historian of these subjects, and my major source on Ron Hubbard was Ron Hubbard.
And that just for those that are listening to the audio, that's the authorized biography of Werner Erhard by William Bartlett III, of which they are very proud of. Hanukkah used to talk to me all the time about their relationship with William Bartlett and how much they loved him and appreciated him. And Werner still has, I mean, he is alive, but he's pretty much in the end stages. So
he's not
near. Yeah, he's not as active, but he has a real thing for academics. I mean, that's what I was saying, what I started to say about Scientology, lost track of my own point, but is Werner, I think, wanted to take the ideas that he found there, as well as many things, and make them conventional, make them normal, and that's where his shrewdness, I think, really changed a lot in our society. I mean, the success of Est, and then all the spin-offs, all the other things.
Tony Robbins, Lifespring, and various other large group awareness.
Yeah, some did cuckoo things with it, with that, but whether they participated directly in Est or not, they're following the pattern. They're looking for the success, they're looking for the whatnot. But he really, I think, did aim to take the kind of weirdness. Chris Shelton taught me the proper pronunciation. I already forgot it the other day, of thetans.
Just think of the word Satan.
Okay.
And have a list.
Satan.
And there you are.
So
little run a joke there.
Yeah, he takes. Okay, that's good. I think I was listening to your show over the weekend with your guest last week, Spike, and you guys were talking about that. But he took all that out of it, and then he got really excited, and is still excited. When I was working with him, he and Steve Zaffron were frequently there at work on how to use the business world to spread. How to use if we got this into businesses and organizations, which honestly, it fits better because I've now since done some consulting work in large businesses using some of these ideas or something similar anyway. And I saw immediately, this is a much safer place for this because the guardrails are there, the HR department, the legal department, there's guardrails. If you're doing it properly, you're not messing in people's personal lives. You really are just providing unique kind of looking at leadership skills, like recognizing that how you respond to a situation is correlated to how you're seeing the situation. Now, that's a simple idea, but it can be quite profound when you're dealing with a bunch of managers who are managing a large group of people, and so that was their thing. And then academia, the whole thing behind the Being a Leader project was to get the ontological, phenomenological approaches to learning and thinking and living into academia. Mike Jensen's dream was that he really wanted to turn it over to academia, and that Werner never wanted that. That was the conflict in that whole project.
How are you going to make money if you turn it over to somebody?
Ding, ding, ding. And he had a problem. He'd already sold it to all these other guys, namely Landmark, and then a handful of others, which now Landmark has bought back. So Landmark has gone around and bought up every license, every place, because Werner would basically repackage and then sell it to a new person and then sell it, which he did to Being a Leader as well, which created a conflict that you can't get past. But Mike's vision was that there would be like a college of ontological study, that academia would do what academia does, which is take ideas, tear them apart, turn them upside down, inside out, study them, test them, argue them, all that. What he didn't realize is Werner was never going to ever.
No, I mean, and again, it follows the arc of Scientology and probably every other, when we start making direct comparisons from 1950 onwards, Hubbard was looking at cybernetics, as of course Werner did, gave us the word Dianetics, so because it was very popular in 1950, and starts talking about how Dianetics would be applied to business. So you have the World Institute of Scientology Enterprises, you have Sterling Management, these have existed for decades, and they license businesses to use. You then have the Association for Better Living and Education, which runs schools all over the world. And this sort of pushing the thing into the society but having to retain your copyrights, your intellectual property, so that you're still making your 10% on everything.
That's right.
And then having control. And there is this very, very much a parallel track between Landmark and Scientology, which is, it was said of me, the late, somewhat eccentric, let's say, Arnie Lerma, who lerma.net is still up there with lots of Scientology material on. He said of me, before the internet, before safety in numbers, there was John Atak, because nobody dared stand up against this monster. I mean, if I'd been more sensible, taking on an organization of 40,000 people with $2 billion, which was the situation in 1983, it's now, I'm happy to say, a much smaller organization. Wasn't great then, but maybe 20,000, but much, much wealthier. And to take that on and go, no, this is wrong, I'm not going to let you do this, and then, be sued all over the world and followed and harassed and my house broken into and scurrilous, being reported for every crime you can think of, none of which have I even been charged with, yet alone convicted of. To have that amount of harassment. Landmark has reached this point now. This happened probably with alt-religion Scientology on the internet in 1993. Suddenly people could anonymize their comments, and there were thousands of people saying, my life was damaged by this. I was abused. I was humiliated. I am still traumatized by what happened to me. And they had been silenced, largely by the threat, by the thought that they'd confessed so much about their personal lives that it wasn't safe to say anything. And knowing, of course, Scientology is famous because it has a full-on harassment machine. It has an actual, there was a point where they were hiring 15 law firms in the US full-time to go after opponents. They're the most litigious organization in the world, something that Werner also learned from Scientology. If possible, ruin him utterly, as Hubbard said of somebody who is practicing without his license, ruin him utterly. That was back in 1955. So that attitude that on the one, I think of Janus, also called Dianus, and from which the word Dianetics may come, the two-faced God, that we tell you we are going to benefit humanity totally and absolutely, but what's actually happening is you're being enslaved psychologically.
Right.
You're being taught principles that will make you compliant and obedient, which will not allow you to think for yourself, because you'll have to think in concord with the teaching. I mean, for me, the year I left was just wonderful, because I didn't have to make my thinking conform in any way with this actually dangerous lunatic, L. Ron Hubbard.
Yeah, they definitely, I thought for sure. I mean, there's a whole bunch in my book that's there in part as a shot across their back. Like, if you sue, I was prepared to be sued. That's what I thought was going to happen, is I was going to sue. I started a TikTok channel, which I have not kept up, because I was going to, every day I would broadcast what happened. And I still will do this if somebody comes after me. What I came to see was that the light was the safest place I could be. I was I'd been dropped off the spaceship in 2020 with their, both the end of the project and the pandemic, of course, but it was more than that. It wasn't, I would have been in the same position without the pandemic. And 26 years of expertise and experience, and being threatened if I tried to use it. That's the other part that's hidden, is if you try to use the knowledge, they're going to come after you. And one of the things that I find really interesting, so there's a whole team of people, like people express their former staff and whatnot, that have been looking through all kinds of court documents trying to find lawsuits. And we found somewhere around 24 lawsuits or something, most of from 90s forward, because we're looking at Landmark. Most of them are employment lawsuits of different, well, the same and different. There's a few about psychological damage. We've found 4 murders, that were tied to people's experience, that they'd have a psychotic break and then murder somebody or something. And then, but what I found interesting is we haven't found one about people using the intellectual property, which, and I'm saying this very deliberately, I hope a lot of people hear this, which is those of us that are in leadership there and then leave, you literally are dropped off professionally, like pretty much exactly where you were when you went into the environment.
Yep.
And that's been hard to confront, both financially, right? And then, but also just like, but wait a minute, because the thing that I was tolerating the exploitation for, even when I understood, oh yeah, I know I'm getting paid below market rate, but A, I'm changing the world, and B, I'm getting all this fantastic training. That's the biggest lie. That's the thing. Werner uses that lie to abuse people. You're getting trained, this incredible training, da 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 da. But then you're told, well, you can use it because you personally embody it. You're the embodiment of these skills of impeccability, of integrity, da 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 da. And of course, people are going to just see that. But you can't put any of that stuff on a resume. And even if you do put it on a resume, say you find a way to translate it, people are going to say, oh, well, where'd you get all this experience? Where have you been working? Every woman in the world knows this. Why women, what they've studied, finding out why a big part of why women get paid less than men isn't so much sexism, which is definitely there, but it's because women take time off to have babies, to take care of parents and so on. And it creates these gaps in their work history. And the way our employment stuff works is your pay is based on your experience and your history. So if you suddenly take 2 years off to have a baby, whatnot, that now goes against you when you come back into the marketplace. Well, imagine taking 20 years off to lead a cult. What do you get? And Landmark people, do not fool yourself. If you put Landmark Worldwide on your resume, a good number of people are going to go, isn't that a culty group?
I'm afraid that is the reputation, that obtains to Landmark and to Scientology.
They just laid off 70% of their staff. And those people are still within the first year. It'll take them 2, 3, 4, 5 years to start realizing, wait, something's really wrong here. Unless they can find.
I think you're probably accelerating that process for them.
I hope so, because the faster they can get into a recovery and deconstruction process, the faster they can reclaim their lives. That's my other frustration at the moment. People are like, well, I know the business was bad. The organization was bad. We all knew that. We all knew that while we were there. That's a very ill-kept secret, even in the internal circles. Like we all thought the business was not run well or properly or whatever. It was weird, but it was worth it for the transformation, for what we saw happen in those hypomanic moments in the forum.
We felt great.
Oh, I had a forum leader tell me, oh, I cured them of their PTSD. And I'm like, that's not a thing. Like, if you actually understand anything about PTSD, that's not a thing. You don't cure, that's just not how that works.
No. So, I mean, there's currently an ex-Scientologist who's selling a program whereby you are inoculated with anesthetic in your stellate ganglia in the sympathetic nervous system that cures PTSD. And
it's not ketamine?
No, it's not ketamine. I don't think they're using ketamine. It's not like the ketamine coma treatment for depression, which has some validity, I think.
His daughter's actually had a lot of recovery support from ketamine done properly with the right.
Yeah, but in this case, that you get into the whole conception of what do we mean by post-traumatic stress disorder, and we find that we have something utterly vague because of this. Obviously, in 40 years, I've met a lot of people who would be diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress disorder, a lot. And when you get into the literature, I think George Bonanno is probably the go-to guy before we start getting into PTSD, because he's studied it for 30 years and gone, well, actually, this is not at all what we're being told it is. It's a societal creation. It's not, of course, people get shell shock, get combat PTSD, of course they do. But most people recover naturally. There was this huge thing in the 90s with debriefing where when somebody had a traumatic incident, they would immediately debrief. They'd say what had happened. And this definitely proved that talking about it after it happened made it worse.
Wow. Well, you just took out the advanced course. That's the core part of the second program in Landmark. I don't know if they're still doing it, but that was one of the core exercises.
let me get into something that's fascinated me in looking at this wonderful book by Bill Bartley, because he had direct access to Werner, and because, forgive me, Werner is not a brilliant man. I'm sorry, he's not a brilliant man.
You don't think?
I'm not in the least bit convinced. There is nothing original in Est. There is nothing that was not borrowed or stolen. Just like the car that he admits to having stolen as a young man when he abandoned his 4 children.
Yep.
His 4 infant children, one of them less than a year old. This is the man we are starting with. This man is a sociopath. He is a man who has no concern for his own children. And when you get to that level, you know you don't need any more of a diagnosis. Somebody who can't stand their own kids, can't be bothered about their own kids, that's a sociopath. What's more, we could quite easily say that's a malignant narcissist. So you start with that, and there are two choices. Either Werner became a pro-social sociopath, and James Fallon is the great study for that particular topic. Such people exist, and they're very useful in society. Or he didn't. And my suggestion from reading what you've written about him as an elderly man, as a disgusting elderly man, he remained a sociopath. The problem that so many people in leaving Scientology have, I left, I was absolutely committed, but I'd not been humiliated and abused. I'd not worked within Scientology. I'd been treated as a celebrity because I'm an artist, I'm a writer and musician. So I'd always been treated with kid gloves. I'd always been treated nicely. I realized after a year of dealing with hundreds of people who come out, every one of them had been abused, humiliated, traumatized by their experience in Scientology, being thrown overboard or having Ron Hubbard give them what he called a severe reality adjustment, standing 2 inches away from them and screaming at them the worst and most destructive things he could think of. You're here to wreck everything. You're here to destroy me. All of this stuff until they broke down. He could push somebody into that. Yeah. And that's a technique too. So finding out that this was who I'd been dealing with, I kind of went, look, there's a simple principle in Scientology. Ron Hubbard said that honesty is sanity. He said the road to truth must be trod with true steps. He was a liar. No doubt about it. I did the biography with Russell Miller. He found, and the contradictions are replete because he never tells the same story twice about his own life.
Wow.
So I've got 23 biographies. No two of them match, but they're all from him. So I knew I was dealing with a liar. And at that point I said, so therefore I should not treat anything I have been taught as true. Nothing. I came away and I realized that people don't want to do that. They'll say, oh yeah, we know that Werner was a really evil man. We know that Ron Hubbard was exploitative, but the technology is great. And you're going, think this through. I don't like Hitler. He was a bad person, but he had some brilliant ideas about humanitarianism. These are deeply exploitative men. And there's something that, to me, this book is fascinating because I'm seeing the route that he traveled. He went from one form of confidence trick to another. So he learns the sales techniques of Napoleon Hill. Okay.
And that's where he was employing, by the way, a lot of his Scientology training, which was pretty significant, was in his sales. He went to Scientology as a way to be effective and productive in growing his teams, running his teams. He taught his teams Scientology. He was reteaching Scientology, which is even with Yoga Man, I mentioned in the group another. I mean, Warner's not the only guru I was close to. Same thing, like they take these techniques and then they're using them in their little lexicon.
They're techniques of manipulation. He goes to Subud, he goes to mind dynamics. He then goes to silver mind control without necessarily realizing this is an offshoot of Scientology as well. And we're dealing here with psychic stuff. We're dealing with extrasensory perception, telekinesis. These are the things he is studying and coming to believe that he has this capacity for.
And they're in the early, there's some other things that are going to be coming out in the next year that'll tell this in detail. It's there in Outrageous Betrayal. I interviewed a longtime leader, Alan Kahn, on my show. He talks about in the Est days, kind of the parlor tricks of psychic work was what they used to register people. So they did this whole thing with these cards, and Alan describes it really well in the interview he did with me. Like you come out of the Est training and suddenly you have these psychic abilities. You can see another's medical condition because I don't know what the theory is, because you're so present or something that you now have access to aspects of the universe that we didn't even know. I don't even know. I heard the whole thing as a kind of parlor trick to get people to enroll. But all of that is very alive in the S training. They lose it when they go into the forum, they get rid of that. But the mind dynamics, mysticism, and psychic ability and all that is very alive in the S training, which is something I did not know, because mostly the S training reputation is all about the confrontational stuff. Have you watched the it's Robin Snyder movie Transformation of
No.
Werner? Oh, I can give you all kinds of material. It's totally fascinating. Again, authorized, but there's a scene in that where he's confronting this woman around her adoption, very much like what you just described. He's not exactly 2 inches from her face, but that technique of standing in front of the room in his booming voice, what you gotta get is totally, that's classic Werner.
Yeah, and there are ways of taking people over. I mean, the first model of the Chinese brainwashing system, Kurt Levin, Edgar Schein, a very simple idea that you unfreeze somebody, so you violate their normal way of being, you then change them, and you then refreeze them. So we also have this, he meets Alan Watts, who wrote some very interesting books and was a confidence trickster. If you read Jeffrey Masson's My Father's Guru, he grew up in a house where Alan Watts and Paul Brunton were frequent visitors. And one of the descriptions that is bothersome about Alan Watts is the horrific way that he treated his wife. And you're going, oh, he's an enlightened being. This is not true. Daisetsu Suzuki, that's the Zen that he brought. Suzuki was not a Zen Buddhist. He was an Amida Buddhist, so he was not a practitioner of Zen. He was not a Zen master. He was a professor of philosophy, and he was a supporter of the Japanese imperial military. We've got this mindfulness going on at the moment, this idea that of the 8 paths of the Buddha, the Eightfold Path, all you need is number 7, mindfulness. You don't need compassion. You don't need good work. And John Kabat-Zinn and Daniel Goleman have gone into the world saying that's all you need. You kind of go, but that's how the Japanese army were trained. Yeah. They meditated in Zazen every day. And the Nanjing massacre, where 400,000 civilians were murdered, it's the largest civilian massacre outside of Genghis Khan ever to happen. They were commended by the Zen master of the general who ordered it, who said, you have now brought true Zen to China by killing 400,000 people. You're going, okay, let's get underneath some of these techniques and what's actually being said. My recent study, since August, I've been looking into the origins of the occultism of the Nazis. Much has been said about this, which is complete nonsense. Pools and Berger, The Morning of the Magicians, Ravenscroft's Spirit, they're just nonsense. But Himmler and various other, Hans Frank, Rudolf Hess, Heydrich, they were involved in occultism. And I wanted to really understand this and where it had come from. I wanted to know, what is Aryan race theory? Where did this come from? And the incredible thing is, it starts in 1882. It starts with an American senator called Ignatius Loyola Donnelly, writes a book about the lost antediluvian, before the flood, antediluvian. And he grabs hold of Plato talking about this place, Atlantis, and that's the only reference there is to Atlantis before this. And Plato says it was 9,000 years ago, so there's nothing historical about it. Creates this thing, says the Aryans came from there. 6 years later, Madame Blavatsky comes along.
So did you just say the Aryans came from Atlantis?
That's what Donnelly says.
I just want to make sure I heard that correctly.
Yeah.
You and Spike were talking about it a little bit too. I happen to be listening over the weekend, but anyway, I find that humorous.
The word actually means Iranian, Aryan. It's cognate with the word Iran, Aryan. But the Nazis, if you ask a neo-Nazi, what's the Aryan race? They go, it's white folks. And you go, well, no, actually the Slavs, the Russians, Eastern, they're not. It's meant to be the Germanic peoples, the Anglo-Saxon, British, the Scandinavians, and that's your lot. And this idea of this racial purity, now to me this is the most despicable idea in all history because it led to the deaths of 50 million people. But you're actually dealing with an idea that passed through various stages. And Werner too plugs into this because he got involved with the Rosicrucians. And the Rosicrucians he'd have been involved with would have been Amorc, the ancient and mystical order of the Rosy Cross. Hubbard was involved with them too. And they pass on these ideas about, magical abilities and what you're able to do, which it's just mist, it's just fog. And it's almost like subprimes that if you package enough things
Yeah.
into a debt vehicle, you can sell it off. Landmark is a collection of techniques that are not scientifically demonstrated. They're then pulled together, made to sound very convincing, and they work. But what do they work to do? L. Ron Hubbard's oldest son, L. Ron Hubbard Jr., who for 7 years was the henchman of his father in the 50s, said, Scientology works. It does not work as L. Ron Hubbard says it works. It works as L. Ron Hubbard intends it to work. So disentangling, going in fact to conventional psychology and saying, what do we actually know scientifically about how we work? And are there ways of doing this that are helpful to people? And there are. So for example, close friend of mine, Ira Chalef. Ira is rather coy about the time he spent working with Ron Hubbard, but he worked directly with Ron Hubbard. He has admitted this publicly. He left in 1982, and at the time he was working for me. He'd been the commanding officer of Scientology at St. Hill in England, and he had colitis, and he couldn't do it anymore. So he came and worked part-time for me, and during that time, he was ejected from Scientology. And he went and he joined a place in Washington, D.C., where they were coaching congressmen, teaching new congressmen.
Oh, good golly.
And what he wanted to do was to bring the techniques of Scientology to these people. So this idea of spreading the techniques into the world. And within a year, the guy running the business had convinced him that Hubbard knew nothing about management, nothing about how to run things successfully. And Ira started to learn. He became the pioneer of what's called courageous followership. He became the pioneer of intelligent disobedience. Courageous followership is now a course that's been done by everybody in the US military and everybody in the support teams. And we're kind of hoping that if Donald Trump declares martial law, they'll say no, because they've studied courageous followership, which is to say that there are useful, effective, and tested ways of doing this, which people are coming out of Landmark or Scientology because you develop such a competence doing these things, but the techniques of themselves are sometimes dangerous. The things that are being done will have long-term effects that you're not necessarily aware of when you're doing the program. Certainly looking at the original EST programs, I imagine there are a tremendous amount of people who were traumatized for life by the way that, we take your watch away, you're not allowed to go to the toilet. By giving over control of yourself to another, which is the fundamental of Scientology, that you surrender control so that you learn you can control yourself. But what actually happened is you surrender control. You bring your thoughts into alignment with the leader and with the teaching, rather than achieving these wonderful goals, the Hunger Project, which was going to end starvation by 1998, if my counting is correct.
Yeah.
Doesn't seem to have happened. But there are genuine and good and useful things that can be done.
Well,
but the rejigging of those programs needs to be so scientifically based, which is where they couldn't get into academia because it wasn't going to actually test positively.
Well, and so that's kind of my ongoing inquiry. And I would say my mission, I always joke, either I'm going to go sell shoes at Nordstrom's, which was my dream job when I was 20, by the way.
I love Nordstrom's too, don't get me wrong.
That's why I always say that, because that was the big job at the time. But or if I'm staying in the world of personal development, I'm going to be shouting from the biggest mountaintops I can find, what is, and right now it is a question because I don't think we have answers, what is the safe and ethical practice of personal development and wellness actually look like? And it's shocking how few people are asking that question and how few people in the industry have any interest in engaging in that. And, as you know, from the end of my book, I've aligned myself very closely with the folks at Seek Safely, who I think, for me, that was a bit of a lifeline because they were asking those questions, which is the same question I was asking, which is a lot like, hey, what's the chaff from the grain here? And what I've come to understand, mostly from my relationship with Ed Gurwitz, who approached me. He was on the team that helped transition the S training to the forum. He became a trainer. He was in the organization from roughly around, I think he did his S training in like 78, 79 until right up into 1990 fall apart. That's when everything transitions in that whole world. That, and then now they're going through a major transition right now, functionally. But that is like, oh, is there validity? What of this could be used? And I'm very close with the who was the global CEO of the Hunger Project just a few years ago. The Hunger Project has gone on to do some absolutely amazing work, like really amazing work, and still does. I mean, I support the Hunger Project to this
Yeah.
day. So I find that interesting how some people take these ideas and really do extraordinary things, and then others don't. Most of them just kind of float around in the ether of the mythos, telling themselves, I have many good friends, oh, it changed my life. And you'll say, well, how? And then they'll tell you about the decision they made when they were 18 that isn't running their life anymore, except for you look, it's absolutely running their life, if nothing else, in this very moment when you're explaining to me about how it no longer runs your life. So it just, so that question's been big for me. Ed's been really helpful but Ed had a way, he was grounded in the ideas in the work. That's why they used him. He's a neuropsychologist, very well, very trained, learned. He's 83 now, and I jokingly call him the most woke white old guy I've ever met because he's never stopped learning, and he didn't stop learning outside the human potential lexicon. He's stayed, very connected and involved. And he attached himself to me because he read my book and he's like, you actually get what we really meant by transformation. What they're doing now is totally destroying it, which that was part of my reason for writing my book. Actually, at the moment I wrote it, I wanted to warn Landmark. They weren't listening. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe they'll listen to this. I just spent 10 years with the source, and tying yourself back to him is not a good idea. That is not how you're going to actually fulfill the mission that I got enrolled in at Landmark, because he doesn't know what he's doing. And speaking of, I had to laugh when you said the bad manager. Werner is the worst manager I've ever seen in my life. Like, if they could do something in 50 steps that could be done in one, they would do it. That was part of my talent, is I was sort of able to take all their nonsensical way of doing things and then actually produce something in the world. But I had to be the bridge between all that nonsense and the way the world actually works. And that was a lot functionally in producing a course and a program and filling it and all those things. That was what I was doing, is I could kind of go over here into I call it the WWW, Wacky World of Werner, pull out the good stuff or at least get the intention, which of course I was labeling on my own intention. I was projecting my own view, my own intent. Yes. I understand that now. I didn't understand that then, but I can see it very clearly now. I was projecting what I thought we were up to. And then I was looking to functionally create it in the world, get lots of academics in the courses, get lots of leaders and consultants and so on in the courses, so that they could take these ideas of ontologically based leadership and do some really great stuff with them. And a few have, and many have not. Most are kind of just spinning in the ideas. They're not actually operationalizing or doing anything that's useful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there are certain fundamentals that are missing. And if you don't have those fundamentals, whatever you're doing won't work. The first is understanding the motivation of the leader.
Yeah.
That in a situation, as you've seen, I've written about human predators. I put aside, I studied psychopaths, sociopaths, narcissists, the many in antisocial personalities, the many in various psychiatric ideas, going right back into the 19th century, where the word psychopath was first being used to mean something quite different. In the First World War, it was used to mean a malingerer. Somebody who wouldn't go into combat was called a psychopath. So the word has shifted. Then Hervey Cleckley in the 90s gives us the mask of sanity, and we start getting the first idea of what we now call a psychopath. And I kind of look at all of that stuff and read Robert Hare's books and whoever else and say, well, yeah, this is very interesting in terms of diagnosis, but what are the characteristics of a person who is predatory? How can I tell that somebody is predatory? And looking at descriptions of Werner or descriptions of Hubbard, they're quite evidently predators. They're people. I mean, Donald Trump has said there are only two types of people, predators and prey. I could not disagree more. And
number one sign of a predator, if somebody is espousing that you're listening to a predator, because they're not going to opt to be the prey. So they're going to do everything that they can to become the predator. I mean, I think it feels like capitalism is that. Anyway,
I agree. I mean, there was a documentary in the I think in the 80s, called The Corporation, which demonstrated that the legal rules that bind a corporation induce psychopathy because you have no concern for the environment, no concern for people. You only have concern for the bottom line, which is profit. And so you end up with what's happening in the United States today. So teaching everybody in the society how to notice predatory people and then how to help them rather than destroying them, which is, just inverts the process and makes you predatory too. How to, if somebody's Hannibal Lecter, you need to put a mask on them for the sake of all concerned. If somebody is a serial killer, you need to lock them up for the sake of all concerned. But it doesn't mean that you then have to treat them badly. It doesn't mean that you have to lose compassion. And it has been shown in the last couple of decades, there are successful ways of treating psychopaths. It was long, one of the criteria was there's nothing you can do about it. Well, that's not true. It's been proved untrue. However, you don't want to make them political leaders, as we have done.
Yeah.
So recognizing what authoritarianism is, the idea that one submits to the authority of another human being without thinking, without comprehending, recognizing the way that we become certain of things, though that there is certainty based upon evidence, which again politicians don't seem to be particularly interested in, and there is certainty based upon belief, conviction. Always tell us 17 and a Bible basher had spent 2 hours talking with me. It was an amiable conversation. He backed away from me though, obviously frightened that I would leap on his back and rip him to shreds. And he said, I don't understand the Bible, but I know it's all true.
Right.
Now, that is noetic certainty, as William James called it. And we all have that. We all have things that we're absolutely sure of that we don't have evidence for.
Let me ask you about something that is occurring to me as you're saying this, is because I've been really curious about how I call it the human potential. I put all this in a bucket that I call human potential movement, right? The me movement is known now. Which is all of this, we can be everything we ever dreamed we can be. And, and some of it takes the kind of woo-woo, secret-y kind of realm, manifestation realm. The landmarks of the world, or it's all about how the world occurs for you and the actions that you take and da-da-da. But one thing that is central in all this is this idea that me, the individual, is center of the universe with all the power. And it just occurs to me that we have allowed that idea to enslave us, the myth of that idea, which is, it really is a myth. And in landmark parlance, it's 100% responsibility. Or I even had a dear friend of mine who voted for Trump the first time. And anyway, all this stuff happened. I happened to be with this person when the election happened. I actually for 48 hours could not be, I was staying at their house and I couldn't be in the house at the same time. I was sobbing. My poor husband took me out to dinner and a movie because I couldn't be there. And I sat at the table crying and then slept through the movie. And I mean, it was terrible. She said to me at one point, she goes, I don't understand why you're so upset. And I said, because what has just been given permission to be expressed in the world, many, 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 many millions of people will die. Yeah. And she said, I don't understand it, but people are personally responsible. And I'm like, that is a myth. And an organization, the human potential training really rests on that. It's similar in every single one. I don't care where you go. Context, Scientology, Landmark, Nexium. It's all about this power of the individual to overcome. It's kind of like what you were saying earlier. If you took how many billions of us are there now? 9 billions. And if what we were all thinking was true, I mean, talk about insanity, chaos.
Let alone what all the ants are thinking and all the
exactly all that conscious. So, but what I find dark humor, and I'm a little into dark humor. I actually call it my English side. I love English psychodramas. Anyway, I haven't done all the reading you had. I'm a Gen Xer, so I've only watched all the shows. My favorite shows are English and Scandinavian psychological thrillers.
Yeah.
But the joke's on us, because this 100% responsibility thing, in my view, has been used to mentally enslave us, to shut us up and shut us down. Because it lets me go, oh gosh, I know the price of eggs is going up. And I know that but
and J.D. Vance promised it would go down.
But I'm 100% responsible. So, what can I do? What can I do? I know I'll start a chicken farm in my backyard, and And
The chickens will get bird flu, and
then the
people
chickens will get
catch
bird
it. No, it's my fault.
Exactly. So it's this endless loop of nuttiness. And rather than going, I've found more freedom in the last 4 years in just surrendering to, you know what? I don't have any damn control. And if you're a parent, you learn this, if you're awake at all, because you learn that you have no control over those monsters at all kinds of stages. And when they grow up into adults, it does not get easier. I don't know. I know you have 4 children.
Do they grow up into adults? I have 4 kids, and they're all past 18. But do they grow up into adults at some point?
Not that I'm really aware of. I haven't either. But they, you know, the biggest thing you learn as a parent is to surrender. That being does not belong to you. That being does not. And I've had to deal with this big time. My daughter she's been diagnosed with complex trauma. And in no small part, in large part to what happened to her while I was away transforming the world rather than at home being a parent. And that's what I get to live with, you know, and I get to process that and deal with that. But what's gotten me through is actually surrendering the idea that I had any control, that, oh, I made mistakes. I did things that, looking back, knowing what I know now, I would do them differently. But I did the best I could with what I knew at the time. And I did a whole exercise where I had to sit down and actually imagine the worst happened. She was very suicidal for a long time, that I got the call that she had taken her own life. I jokingly always say I have a coach, a spiritual teacher that I work with one-to-one, and a therapist. And a lot of really good friends. And I walked through, and I just, to the best of my ability, lived through that moment of getting that call, because I was living in terror of it. So I'm like, okay. And the biggest thing I got out of that is that I had to give her life to her. And what she chooses to do with it is hers. And my job is to love and respect and honor her choices, even when I think they're terrible. I don't have to agree. I don't have to whatever. But we do have free will, and she gets that. So now I bring that out into the world. Like, you know what? I'm an American. I'm sorry. And I'm utterly embarrassed and horrified by what our country is doing right now.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm really curious. I'm just really, really curious about how we got here, what's really going on, you know, and that's how I stay sane. That, and I get all my news from comedians.
Yeah, me too. It's all Jon Stewart and Jimmy Kimmel and Stephen Colbert.
Yeah, John Oliver.
They're people I didn't spend any time with at all until this last Trump cycle. The one before, I did watch a great deal of material about Trump because I couldn't understand, talking about predators, that somebody who is so obviously fits that, somebody who does not care about anybody, who is completely solipsistic, who has the maturity of a toddler. You know, I'm going to get rid of anybody in the FBI that worked on any cases about the January 6th insurrection. You're going to do what? And why are you doing?
That's what how he got voted in is because there is a significant amount of our population, and we have to deal with this. In fact, I think he's a little bit of a distraction. We need to deal with more than 50% of our voters that voted think that that's an admirable way to be, because I think it fits in with this 100% responsibility, autonomous, hyper-individualistic view that is put up on this pedestal, and it's leading to our ruination. It's not how the world works. It's not how nature works. And if we keep persisting in that, we will end up in you know, very, very dire circumstances. My spiritual teacher I work with, she's like, well, you know, Mother Earth might just shake her shoulders and off we go, because we're not going to win. We're not going to dominate the earth into submission. You know, we're going to run out of air or run out of water or run out of the things that we need to live. So, but I'm starting to see the interplay between the human potential movement and that, because it so elevates this meism. It elevates this idea that I'm the source, and then it gets used against me. Like, oh, well, you chose them. You chose them. So,
it's the just world idea. If something bad happens to somebody, it's their fault. So therefore, we don't need welfare. We just need to, you know, if anything unfortunate happens to somebody, they catch a disease, it's because they made themselves vulnerable. So let's just keep on going. We don't need Medicaid. We don't need Medicare. We need this great cull where a certain proportion of the population, they're going to die off. And you sort of, let's take vaccination away from the third world, the developing world, and they will therefore develop diseases, and which they will then pass, into the world. This is how the Spanish flu happened, and what a misnomer! It's the American flu. It was brought over to Europe by U.S. troops in 1917, and it killed more people than World War One.
Wow!
And that was because they were packed into troop ships, and it wasn't their fault. It was the fault of the idiot who allowed people who were carrying this deadly disease to be packed together. So, rather than quarantining. So I'm not a situationist. I don't believe that it's all just happening to us. I am not a believer in the 80-20 rule, which people want to apply to everything. But in this case, I'm going to apply it. I think 80% of what happens is situation. There's nothing we can do about it. 20% we might be able to do something about, and it's maximizing what we can do and developing that. But when we look at the history of these crazy ideas as they have developed, this is what's fascinated me in the last 6 months, that you can see ideas that are being used in Landmark, that are being used in Scientology, that have their origins with Madame Blavatsky, that have their origins, for example, one of the ones that bothers me the most is the separation of the self, that the idea Blavatsky had, you have a higher self. I don't know why he's not looking...
Translation, the big S self. You have the little S self and the big S self.
Yeah. Now, so you've already split yourself in two, and that's a big part of yourself you don't know about. In Scientology, you'd also have the reactive mind. You don't know what that's doing. You have demon possession, body thetans in Scientology, the idea you've got all of these little beings inside you. You don't know what they're up to. You have the id. Oh, who knows what the id's doing? You have the unconscious mind. There is no such thing as the unconscious mind. There are unconscious processes, but to call it the unconscious mind is to say there's an agent and you don't know what that agent's thinking. For me, after 40 years on the Buddhist path to enlightenment, and Scientology was just a part of that for me. I was 17 and I met these amazing ideas, and until I was in my 50s, and so most of the work I've done regarding cults, I would still have regarded myself as a Buddhist, until one day I went, I don't believe this anymore. I don't believe in enlightenment. I don't believe in some wonderful state of perfection. I don't believe in nirvana. I don't believe in past lives. I'd long since stopped believing in that. I don't believe in one lifetime Buddhism, Stephen Batchelor and all of that. I don't believe in sitting still and looking at things. And, I did Zazen. I learned it in a monastery and I meditated, and it was very useful to me to be able to concentrate, to be able to focus my mind, to be able to get into the pre-linguistic self. But I do not recognize any illegal aliens inside me. I am me. This is the self. It's my body. It's my brain. It's my mind. If there is anything spiritual, it's my spirit. But frankly, following Zhang Su's teaching, I couldn't care less whether there's a spirit or not. I don't know where I was before I was born. I'm not sure I was anywhere. I don't know where I am after I die. And I do accept with my friend Joe Zimhart that our fear of death drives so much. And it's like, I'm not really frightened. As Woody Allen said, you don't mind dying, you just don't want to be there when it happens. You're not there when it happens, Woody.
Right. I kind of figure we'll figure it out. We'll know someday, hopefully not soon, like that's kind of my, right.
This is the eternal now. And so all of those concerns, all of those things that one wishes to be transformed from, or that, Werner is looking at the Zen technique called the bursting of the bag. And, when we look at the fact that from 1858 in the Meiji Restoration through till now, Zen Buddhism has first of all trained the military and then the corporations. The corporate man in Japan, they meditate every day. This is not the solution to our problems. It makes us more controllable.
Well, the whole idea in the human potential world is present, and it's in the pseudo-spiritual world too, right? If I just get present, then I have the most power. And I don't know, maybe there's some truth in it. I don't know. I kind of don't care.
If you're present, you don't use your memory. You don't use any of your
what does that mean, right?
Oh dear, what have I come? Steve Kent, the brilliant researcher, one of the few truly remarkable academics looking at what are being called new religious movements. What a laugh. He wrote a book called Slogans and Mantras. And I'd arrived at the thought too that what happened in the 60s was that the human potential movement, and Werner had nothing to do with the origins of the human potential movement. Carl Rogers and people were there in the 40s, Abraham Maslow. Right. With these ideas, that failed. What happened was that the hippies and the counter-establishment people, the Stop the War, it failed. You've got the Watts riots, you've got the civil rights movement, you've got, and the state demonstrated that it was a great deal more powerful than we were. And so political action stopped in the US almost. And people started getting into me. I can't transform the world. When there are enough me's transformed. But the problem was that the me transformation was usually aimed at worldly success. It wasn't withdrawal spiritually. And the spiritual withdrawal, how useful is it having a lot of people with paralyzed limbs wandering around and telling you, I managed to stick my arm out for 10 years and look, it doesn't move anymore, which is actually considered a great thing in Hinduism, in certain aspects of Hinduism. Or I withdrew from the world, I had no children. So I was, we've taken the best, the brightest people and we've made monks of them so that they aren't parents. How useful is that?
Have you read, so Est is actually, there's a man that figures out to call it Erhard seminar trainings, but it actually comes from a book, which I bought. I spent $100 to buy this book from some used bookstore in London called Est, the Stearman Handbook. You got to get that. You got to get that, and then you got to email me and tell you, because that's where it all comes from, and it describes a whole bunch of what you're talking about. I have it down the stairs, so I'd show it on the screen. But that's actually more the origin of Est, for all the old Est heads out there. The Scientology and that, and a few other things. But anyway, I just had to mention that to you. So I'm curious. So you have somebody here who will tell you anything you want to know about Landmark or Werner or whatever from the inside. So I'm curious if you have any other, I don't want to interrupt our flow, but I'm also wanted to put that out there, like if there's anything. And I elected myself, and there's a few others now talking as well, but I'm probably the one that was the closest to the center, and also I don't have an axe to grind. I'm not in Landmark world on it. I'm not being a racket. I'm in a weird way actually grateful for my time there. Like I can see there was lots of value, lots of experiences I had that were pretty extraordinary. But I am now getting straight about the dark side and what doesn't work, because how can we evolve if we don't look at that? If we don't get honest about how we're harming ourselves and subjugating ourselves and all of that. That's kind of where I'm at now, as I'm like, wow, look at that. How are we getting convinced to be exploited, to be participants in our own exploitation?
Slaves.
We're not going to get rid of all the psychopaths and sociopaths, whatever we call them next. That's going to be amongst us, and they should have whatever accountability we can put together that makes sense. And I'm not against any of that, but I am very interested in this other side, which is those of us that get taken in by and follow that and give over our resource, whether it's the resource of our mind, our time, our money, to elevate that. And I'm pretty obsessed with that right now, particularly given what's going on in my own country, which I'm literally seeing. We have elevated that to the point of our own, not just our own destruction, but we're creating destruction around the globe with what we're doing to ourselves right now, in my opinion. So are we going to sit up and talk about it or not? Well, that's kind of where I'm.
Yeah, I mean, I started, I left Scientology in 1983. I'd been involved for 9 years. I wasn't on the staff. I had a good time. I got no axe to grind, as you say. I was just concerned that there was a trail of people coming to my door who were damaged, whose lives had been ruined financially, emotionally, and in other ways, families that had been torn apart. I found out there was a culture of oppression and harassment, and I found that out straight away. The first day that I went public, October the 18th, 1983, I hosted a first public meeting of disaffected Scientologists in the UK by accident. I didn't set it up. I was asked to host it.
I feel like you're describing the last year of my life, except for most of the people coming to me still want to be in secret. They still don't want to, because... that was exactly the case. I mean, 38 people wrote resignations from Scientology during this first 6 weeks that I was doing this. But the very first day, I was talked into hosting this meeting, which had already been set up, nothing to do with me. And there were 2 Scientologists on the door with clipboards taking the names of everybody who attended. And that was the point where I realized this was real, that this was not
a world-saving, positive organization. These people were there, and sure enough, the next day, somebody who was at the meeting, Uni Richmond, was declared suppressive, and the harassment machinery started. You talk about Est and litigation, you found, 24 cases. There are more than 10,000 Scientology cases, and I was on the receiving end of about 10 of them. And, they would just steamroller and rip. So you're not dealing with something that's good.
Right.
You're dealing with something that's very nasty. So I studied that in as much depth as I possibly could. I wrote the only comprehensive history of Scientology, which I think is still the only comprehensive history of any post-World War II cult.
Wow.
That there is no academic work in this area because these groups are scary. They will attack you. They will go for you. So you have academics like Brian Wilson, the late Brian Wilson at Oxford, not the Beach Boy, who was paid by Scientology to invent with Gordon Melton the concept of the new religious movement. They were paid. And Est was included as a new religious movement. You go, what's religious about? What are we talking about here? And new, that's a vague one. Was that 1830 when the Latter-day Saints began? Or is it after the Second World War? Depends where you go. But Wilson wrote a set of criteria for determining whether something is a religious movement or not. And he used Scientology as the model to do that, to prove that it is a religion. Now, we get into difficulty here because one of the offshoots of Scientology, and most people are not aware of this, is the Charles Manson family. Wow. Charles Manson spent 14 months and had 150 Scientology auditing sessions.
But instead auditing doesn't work.
Well, it leads to success in any walk of life. So if you wanted to be the poster child for serial killing, he was successful. And I think Manson did want that. Manson saw himself as, fear was the essential thing. But you have these groups that are created that run along these lines. So I became interested in terrorism. I spent years, book behind me, Lone Act of Terrorism. It's an OUP book. There's a chapter in there on how what we are now seeing is people self-recruiting.
Yes. Yeah.
So they don't join any group and they go and kill people.
Right.
And that mentality, the mentality that is fundamentally, I for a long time went with the term that's used in the ex-cult world, which is totalitarian or totalist, and then kind of went, the word totalitarian was first used to describe Mussolini, a total authoritarian, a totalitarian. And looking at that, looking at the various strong men and the occasional strong woman like Margaret Thatcher or Indira Gandhi or Golda Meir or the Empress Catherine or the Dowager Empress. There have been a few. And it's not a gender thing. People who are horrible. There just happen to have been a lot more men than women who were really horrible so far. Hopefully it will lead to equality, and there'll be as many. But in looking at that, I started to look at the commonplaces in all gang formations, terrorist groups, pseudo-religions, multi-level marketing, commercial cults, therapy cults, all of these things. There are commonplaces, and they are aspects of our society. They don't just exist in these groups. Political groups use them all the time. When I watched the first New Labour campaign in 1997, Tony Blair, I was horrified as somebody who was studying persuasion techniques. Then I found it derived from the Clinton campaign. The guy called Philip Gould had been on the Clinton campaign, and he wrote his book about how that was done. We got spin doctrine, and the spin doctors wrote books about how we're conning you, and we all lost faith in politics, quite rightly. And to drain the swamp of billionaires, the US put a billionaire in charge.
And who, with a cadre of billionaires.
So my thought is that what the society needs, the transformation that society needs, is to understand authoritarianism. Why do we submit?
Yes.
Why do highly intelligent people become committed to extraordinarily dangerous groups and to commit horrors?